Good Wednesday morning to you. In my daily devotions a week or two ago, I came across the passage from Isaiah 55. It's one that's very familiar to us, especially during the season of Lent. It's often we read the beginning verses of Isaiah 55 during the season of Lent, and they read, "Come all who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come and buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money, without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread and labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and you will delight in the riches of the fair." The prophet throughout these verses are calling the people. Isaiah is broken up into three different sections. In this third section, the people have repented to God. They have turned from their evil ways. They have come back to the God who has loved them and sustained them. And now Isaiah is responding with God's response. Isaiah is being filled with God's Spirit, and God is opening the doors. God is reestablishing his covenant with his people. So as the verses go on, by the time you get to verse 6, there's this refrain, "Seek the Lord while he might be found. Call on him when he is near. Let the wicked forsake their ways, and the unrighteous for their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will freely pardon." There's this theme throughout chapter 55 and then the later chapters of coming back to the God. I always think about this in perspective of just my faith and conversations I have with people in the congregation on how often we forget it isn't God who forsakes us. It is we who turn away from God. Since the Garden of Eden, we've been hiding from God, especially in times when we are ashamed or we realize that we've done something that deserves great punishment. We hide ourselves from God. God doesn't hide his face from us. In fact, the psalmist reminds us to ask that God would not hide his face. "Do not hide your face from me, O Lord." But in Isaiah, this passage is making it rather easy. Yes, you failed. Yes, you've turned away. Yes, you haven't been the people God has called you to be. And yet, God still loves you. Come back to the Lord. Seek his face. Seek his forgiveness. Come back to the Lord, for he is here, ready and waiting. And I think about this as I've reflected on my own faith life, and this is why I think it's still on my mind, even after a week or two of being in this specific word in my daily devotional life, is that how God sees the world is not how we see the world. And how God sees you and me is not how we see or what we see when we look in the mirror. And what gets me every time about this passage in Isaiah is verse 8. It says this, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." In the midst of this recalling, in the midst of this invitation to come back and be in God's presence, God reminds us very clearly through the prophet, God reminds us, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways." How you see the world is different than how I see the world. That's the conversation that the prophet is reminding the people of God. And now as I sit back and I think about, centuries later, as I look at the world, as I come to God in prayer, as I wonder and worry and seek God's imagination with all that is happening in our world, these words are no more powerful for me than they were for the Israelites. "My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways, declares the Lord." Every time you worry about how God sees things or what's happening in the world and you start making conclusions, right? We're in a time where it's so easy to draw and grasp for conclusions. Because this is happening, then that's going to happen. There's this wonderful Latin phrase, post hoc ergo propter hoc. I forget all of the difference, but it's therefore because of, and therefore because of. Those who love Latin should correct me on that in the comments. But the whole idea of post hoc ergo propter hoc is just because something happens doesn't mean it was caused by that which happened before. And sometimes we, as Christians, we fail to let the imagination of God be first and foremost. We fail to let God's insight be what guides us and not our own. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways, declares the Lord. In the middle of the week, in the beginning of a new month, in a year that we're still not quite sure about, I can think of no better word for us to hear today. My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways, declares the Lord. I don't know about you, but I take great comfort in that. I hope you have a great day.